Hello, everyone. This is Carter McKinney from the Entrepreneurs Club podcast. I'm here with Miss Camilla Greene. This is an honor to interview her. She is a well-known elder, activist, and so many other great things here in the community. And I just want to give her a chance to introduce herself. But again, this is just a true honor to interview her and hear her story. So here you go. This is Miss Camilla Greene. Just introduce yourself to the people, and we'll go from there.
Hi, Carter. It is great to have this opportunity to meet you, to get to know you, and also to possibly share my story with you. I'm honored and humbled by this experience.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And so yeah, let's get right into it. So let's start with your early life. So were you born in New York then? Or?
Yeah, I was born in Brooklyn, third generation. My grandparents bought a brownstone on Bainbridge Street, 105 Bainbridge Street, in 1927. And my grandfather paid approximately $4,000 for that brownstone. It's now worth $3 million. And we lived there until about the 1960s. And my parents, when they got married, they bought a brownstone at 149 Bainbridge Street, which was across Stuyvesant Avenue. And that's where I grew up. So I was between my grandparents' home and my parents' home. In New York, I've thought a lot about, since living here, what was different about my experience versus people growing up here. And it was that I think there were over 30,000 Black families in New York City, in the Brooklyn, Manhattan, the Bronx area, and Queens. And I had Black excellence from the time I could even recognize what Black excellence was. And people were friends of my family. I was at an event at the Active Living Center last week. Melba Tolliver spoke. And she said, "Is anyone here from Brooklyn?" And I raised my hand. I was the only one. And then she said something about Shirley Chisholm. Shirley Chisholm was someone that I interacted with as a child growing up. Adam Clayton Powell. I just can't think. Cab Calloway. He was friends with Judy across the street, Judy's parents. And whenever they came, we would all play out on the street together with his daughters. So I had a legacy of Black excellence. And I was born, as much as a Black person can be born, with a silver spoon in their mouth, because I was an only child. Both my parents worked. My mom was a court stenographer in the surrogates court, and my dad was a New York City cop in the 1950s and 60s. And there were not that many Black cops then. My mother was also a concert pianist, and she played the organ for Concord Baptist Church and Mount Lebanon Baptist Church. So we were not religious. We didn't go to church every Sunday, but I was used to seeing my mother play the organ, going to church, going to rehearsals, and Reverend Gardner Taylor married my parents and christened me. There were just so many great people. I feel like I don't want to leave any of them out, but there were a lot. Yeah.
That's incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So it's cool to hear from, there's so many legends that we hear about in the world, like Adam Clayton Powell and all these great people that you grew up with in a way and shared memories with. That's amazing. So let's get into a little bit later of your early life. So talking about, you said that, your mom had worked in the church, and that you didn't necessarily go to church all the time growing up, but can you talk about how your faith grew as you got older, and kind of taking us into the next chapter of your early life, maybe early adulthood, and becoming an adult and your first, the beginning of your career?
So I see my religious experience as being schizophrenic, because I was going to a Quaker school. And Quakers believe, "Be still and know that I am God." And I would go to Quaker meeting, which was part of the school ritual. And I would also go to the Baptist church. And they literally had a marquee that said, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord." So as a child, I really wanted to know, are we supposed to be quiet? Or are we supposed to be joyful? And so I went through a period of not understanding why those two things could be part of a religion. And I found out that as I get older, I'm drawn more to the quiet. So it's been an interesting journey because I feel people today are afraid of silence. And I don't know why. And maybe I do know why. But the other thing is that my grandparents were deacons in the Concord Baptist Church, and they passed on to me a spirituality, a religion that I have turned to in my life. And when I talked to my grandson, who's 18, he said that he is agnostic because he has a very scientific mind, and I think a lot of the young people today do. And he says there's no scientific proof that there is a God, there's no scientific proof that there is not a God. So I respect that also, that framing. So when his grandfather died, I asked him, what do you think happens in death? And he said he thinks it's just a black hole. So I feel a little sad that I have not been able to pass down that legacy of religion to the next generation, but I mean, he has the rest of his life to figure some stuff out.
Yes, absolutely. Yes. So in terms of legacy, that's a really good point to talk about is how do you view your legacy and your story of all the things that you've accomplished, all the way from, different political things and your faith, being an educator, and all these amazing things. Could you talk a little bit about your legacy and what you look to, pass forward to future generations? Maybe you could even start with some of your accomplishments and some of the things that you look to pass forward to future generations for legacy.
So I have to think about the communities that I've created in my classroom and how I felt that it didn't matter what I knew, but what mattered to me always was what I could get my students to want to know. And I wanted them to buy into education, not because someone said they should, but because they see it as a meaningful process for their own edification. So we always created a community. I can't teach you if I don't know you. And we started with a check-in, and very often being late to class in high school was a thing, but because I started with check-in, which was a very simple 5 or 10 minutes before we started the class, what's coming up for you? It was there that I found out that one of my students was up all night because her friend wanted to commit suicide. It was there that I found out that one young man was struggling because his mother said there were no positive black men. And she was a single mom, and she was saying this to her son, and how he was really hurt by that. And people assume that when you come to class, you're ready to connect to the curriculum. And I never made that assumption because you have a life outside the class. So it was important for me to have them transition into the class. And then it was also important for me to have them have a ticket out. So what did they take away? They had to verbalize it, write it on an index card, and give it to me to leave the class. Because I also want to know what part of what we discussed or did or read or saw really resonated for them, and what was their next question for tomorrow, possibly.
Yes. I love that. As an educator myself, I'm in my beginning stages, but that's really amazing to hear because that's right. To be able in communication, when you're dealing with people, you have to make sure that they're ready to receive the message that you have, that it's the right time, place, method of delivery, and all these great things. So that's spot on. What else would you like to talk about in terms of your education? Can you talk about, I believe you had some different places that you you went over to Brown for a few different sabbaticals and things of that nature. So can you talk about a little bit more about your educational journey and a few of the places that you did it and some things like that?
So there was one of my mentors was Ted Sizer, and he wrote a book called Horace's Compromise. And he spent maybe 10 or 12 years going to every high school, or as many high schools as he could in America, and interviewing kids. And what he found, that they were all bored. And so he started this coalition of essential schools, and he felt that schools should be directed by essential questions, that when you can create an essential question and then make that the focus of your exploration or your learning, that's when true learning occurs. He had wanted teachers to be a guide on the side and not a sage on the stage. That was one of the mantras. So I was really impressed by his program, and I became part of the National School Reform faculty. And that meant teachers helping other teachers. It wasn't a teacher who had left the classroom 10 years ago and coming back to tell you what you should be doing in the classroom. All of us were teachers, and we had to be released 45 days in the school year to go work in Chicago, go work in Philly, go work in California, and work with other teachers collaboratively. So out of that grew the Coalition of Essential Schools at Brown University. So I worked with them as a National School Reform faculty, and what was nice, I had an intern who was taking a master's degree in education, and she was assigned to me. So when I left the classroom, she knew my students, she knew the curriculum, she would just ease in. It wasn't a substitute that had never seen the kids before. So that allowed me to relax as I left the students. And when I came back, they would joyfully say, okay, so what do you have for us now? Because I would bring back some ideas to help enrich their education. So I really hoped that this program would really take off. But what I found, a lot of teachers don't want to think critically about their own curriculum. A lot of teachers actually said to us, just tell us what to do. It's too hard to figure this out on my own. And that sort of distressed me. But then again, there were always a cadre of teachers that would buy into this way of thinking. And as you can imagine, it got even more interesting because Walter Annenberg decided to give Ted Sizer $500 million to reform public education in high schools. And so then I went to work full-time with the Annenberg Institute for School Reform. And we started the Consortium of Urban Excellence, CUE, at Annenberg. And we worked specifically with mostly black schools in Chicago, Philadelphia, New York, and elsewhere. I don't know what to say about the demise of that initiative. It was a heck of a lot of money. And most places, you wouldn't even know that it ever existed or ever happened. I think we used to do a timeline of public education from 1647 up to the 2000s. And public education is really a sorting mechanism to program and groom kids for the marketplace. And once you have that as your mandate, anything innovative, anything that causes people to question the status quo is not really what they want. And so here we are.
Wow. Powerful, yes. Honestly, being a product partially of public school, but I actually went to private school as well quite a bit throughout my career. That's definitely how I felt. I mean, having what felt like just a cookie cutter system that, someone that, I did not like to read. I like to watch films and listen to music, and experiential learning is just critical. And honestly, I don't feel like I got much of any of that. If you did like a lab or something, it felt like a treat because, that was something that was like an experiment. It was hands-on, and that's totally my vibe. Let me touch things, let me do it, let me experience it, and kind of coach me, and even stand over me and coach me in that way. So that's amazing. So in terms of your work in the African American and Black community, can you touch on some of your work in that way? Maybe some different movements or programs outside of the ones that you've already discussed, so people can understand the gravity of your impact and some of your work in that way.
So I guess one of the things that comes to mind is that I'm part of the Hip Hop Genius Network. And there are folks around the country who decided they were going to school me in hip hop. And I told them I didn't want to waste my time listening to negative hip hop, so they only told me about KRS-One and Jay-Z, actually. In fact, one of my colleagues, a young guy, Isaac, in Philly, he was friends with Jay-Z because he went to Trenton Central High School. And Jay-Z used to come to Trenton Central all the time, and he said he would tell the teacher, oh, he's new on your roster, you just haven't gotten his name in yet. So I've become a fan of Jay-Z. I've read Decoded, his book, and I encourage spoken word with my children, with my students. And I always remember one point, there was a Holocaust competition. And two boys, Black boys, wrote a hip hop about the Holocaust that was solid. But I knew that when they went to the judges, they were not going to be able to relate to it. And I felt you can bring out the genius, but it doesn't mean that everyone else is going to understand where it's coming from and what it is. And I've always been proud. Sam Seidel has just written several books on hip hop genius. And he's a dear friend of mine, and I continue to learn about hip hop. We've done workshops together, and it always disappointed me that my age group in the workshop would say, oh, they couldn't get any, they didn't see any good in hip hop, absolutely none. And I feel that created a division in our community because the old no longer, I mean, they want them to pull their pants up, take the caps off, and not do hip hop. I don't know what they wanted them to do, but that was not possible. And I'm so sorry that they, en masse, would not accept the hip hop generation and what value they had to bring to our legacy.
Yeah, it's such a shame. I'm a huge fan of hip hop and rap and all those things myself. It's a shame because, behind the vulgarity and, different allusions to, different relations and cussing and all those things, that the language really gets diluted and misunderstood, because there's such a story, especially in the Black male community, where people struggle to express themselves. And there's so much, especially in the Black male community in hip hop, that is, just a beautiful diary of stories of, feelings that they may even be misunderstood themselves, but that's their best way that they can communicate it. So it's interesting that your interest in hip hop. So let's pivot to, a little bit more into your career. So let's talk about a little bit further into like politics. Like, what has been your interest in politics, some of your activity in it, and, different participation in that, if you can.
Well, I guess I have to, again, my parents were district captains for the Democratic Party in New York, in Brooklyn. And I used to help them hand out flyers or whatever, so I always had a political sense. My aunt was the executive director of the YWCA in Harlem, and she was always, she even met, Eleanor Roosevelt and worked with her. So there was always so much to be done. There were regattas and recitals and to raise money for the Brooklyn Home for the Aged. So I became very much interested in giving back to the community. In fact, that was really the legacy that my family gave me, is that, but for the grace of God, there go I. but I have to give back to the community. And I remember walking down the street, and I had my white gloves on, and I saw a little girl, and she didn't have her white gloves on. And I said, Nana, why doesn't she have her white gloves on? And she said, because she doesn't know better. So I said, well, I can help her. And so that's why I decided to become a teacher, to take away the mystification of oppression, actually, to help people find liberation in education, because education can be oppressive. And I saw all the ways. You know, I never had to have a pass to go anywhere for 13 years that I was at Brooklyn Friends. My word was my bond. So I tried to create that in a public school setting. And it used to upset the other teachers because my students wouldn't have passes. And so when they accosted them in the hallway, and they did accost them, where are you going? And they didn't have a pass, they were upset. So in a lot of ways, Ted Sizer used to say, the best schools are those with the fewest rules, and those rules make sense to everybody. And if a kid didn't go to the bathroom or the library, then there was something wrong with our relationship, and we had to talk about it. So it's just amazing. People don't even realize how dehumanizing public education can be. There literally were, one school I visited in Brownsville had red dots on doors you weren't supposed to go through and green dots on doors you could go through, and literally had a line down the hallway. You're only supposed to be on one side or the other. How draconian. I just can't imagine. And this was in the 60s. So I can't imagine what they're doing now.
Yes, no, it can be so crazy with rules and these different institutions and organizations. That's an amazing quote that you shared. And I would just like to touch next on so you were talking a little bit about the difference between New York and like the Lehigh Valley, I believe you said. So can you say a little bit more about like how long you've been here, a little bit of like the lived experience, what brought you out here from New York, and the kind of change that you've also seen here in the Lehigh Valley?
So actually, my husband and I lived in Queens, then we moved to Connecticut for 30 years. My daughter decided at the age of 40 that she was going to become a single mom by choice, and she went to a sperm bank. We have a cousin who was a single mom by choice, and that is an organization, and she was mentoring my daughter. My daughter told her father and I that we were her support system. So we sold our home in Connecticut, that we'd been there 30 years, and we moved with her to Lehigh Valley because she was living in New Jersey, and she could not afford a bigger house in New Jersey. This is generally the way it is, and so she bought a lovely home, and then we added an in-law suite onto her home. Her son was born, and we stayed there 8 years, and then we moved into the facility of Woodmont Ridge about 10 years ago when it first opened. So there were a lot of differences, but at that time I was traveling around the country as a consultant, so I really wasn't here in Lehigh Valley. And I loved the ABE airport. It was so convenient, even though it's more expensive to fly in and out of it, but I was always on an expense, so it didn't really matter. When I was able to settle and develop friendships, I found that most of the friends that I had were from someplace else. There is a complacency, I find, among people born and bred in Lehigh Valley. And I think so if I got fired in New York, which I did, I can find a lot of other jobs quickly. I feel the Lehigh Valley was locked into Bethlehem Steel, and that was the only major employer, and if you upset someone or you lost your job, it wasn't that easy to find another job. So it's because of that that I give a lot of grace and concern to folks that grow up here. And the other thing is that, I don't know what the statistic is, but 74% of people in Lehigh Valley never lived anywhere else. And I feel that parochialism also plays into it. And they don't have any stellar models for leadership that have, I don't even think people even can describe what their leadership style is. It's in many ways a small pond where everyone's competing for the same resources. And it doesn't create solidarity amongst the people by and large. And it's very divisive. And yeah, so that's that. But I am glad that I am here now because I have such a great community of friends. 80 families got together when we first moved here, and we opened 7 Generations Charter School in Emmaus for our children, and my grandson went there until 2nd grade. We wanted it to be run by consensus. And most people could not conceive of how that could even be possible. And it still exists now, and it's a very traditional school, but it's a beautiful building. And some of the elements that we put into it, I can still see that are there. And those same people are folks with whom I interact now. You know. Yeah.
Lovely. I had no idea about the charter school. That's really cool. And the fact that the community could band together and open something like that, that's the kind of concepts that we've been discussing at the Black Wall Street with Miss Mary Griffin. And you know, getting together and opening a bank or doing all those great like things that seem like impossible, you know, in a kind of relaxed conversation. But yes. So in terms of the Lehigh Valley and what, you know, even what New York did for you, can you talk a little bit more about New York and maybe your journey across to Connecticut and across the country for your work, and how the different themes across the country as we are in this year of, you know, America 250, you know, what different themes that you saw navigating America as, you know, a Black female, you know, in business and in education and in a professional sense, you know, and just as a human, you know, what kind of memories that you can, you know, touch on for that?
So I guess I don't know, years back they used to call you a race woman, but race has always mattered to me. And wherever I am, I have been outspoken to the point where I've lost several jobs. And some of them are interesting, some of them are almost hysterical. There was an organization called Educators for Social Responsibility in Massachusetts, and they wanted to hire me. And I gave them all my references. Victor Carey in Oakland, California, he said, if you get Camilla, this is what you're going to get. And he laid it out. And they said, that's exactly what we want. So they hired me and another Black woman, Aninka Nala. And when we got there, we told them, they had the Bible on advisories for high schools. We had some pushback on their advisory Bible book. And I said, okay, maybe you should never criticize something that's already in print. We traveled with them when they went to other schools, and we gave them feedback on what we saw from our lens. They didn't like that. So they told us after 2-3 months, both of us, we were not a good fit. And when I went back to Victor, he said, well, I told them exactly what you would bring. And when I talked with them, they said, we thought we were ready. So most people say they want something, but they don't actually know what it's going to look like when it shows up, and they may not be ready for it. So that's the way, but I can't start in the kiddie pool anymore because kids are being impacted in horrific ways. For example, this advisory thing had reasons why people commit suicide, teenagers. It was all from a white perspective. Our kids don't often commit suicide, but when they do, it's a different set of reasons. So what happens is people can I always wanted the world, people to be able to look from multiple perspectives. And I realize how hard that is for a lot of people. I may not have done drugs, but I can understand the perspective of someone who is recovering from drugs. People seem to just isolate themselves from so many different experiences and think that, I don't know, they pontificate or what you should and shouldn't do, and there's no ability to actually connect with another person in ways that are authentic and meaningful, even within your own family sometimes.
Absolutely. I believe that, being aware to different perspectives also can be uncomfortable. And I think that that's why a lot of people will sit in their comfort. And even saying, about the statistic about majority of people living in Lehigh Valley haven't lived elsewhere. Again, that level of comfort, living by one set of rules, knowing the clique that lives here, and, having the conversation of potentially moving somewhere else, moving abroad, or going to a big city. I think that a lot of those themes kind of play into each other. Mm. And I would say that I definitely have an interest in basically talking about any other thoughts that you have basically about this whole theme of like America 250. I think it's an interesting time to reflect on, what is a young country, and just seeing what has been the biggest change that you've observed throughout these years.
So I think white supremacy culture has come out of the closet. I think they feel that they are losing traction in the world, and so they are dehumanizing everyone who is not in white skin identity. That's the beginning and end of it. They see the current leader as Christ coming back to save them all. I don't know what to do with stupidity, to be quite honest with you. I can have a conversation, you can disagree with me, but if you are so stuck in the fact that you are supreme, I don't know what to do. And it is really causing me to pull back and to find my peace and my sanity in folks with whom I have, and they're all races, all ages, all identities possible. And that is so soothing for me, to find authentic community where we can give and receive feedback, give and receive love, and support each other in the world that doesn't want us to exist, and still be impactful in ways that I just got an email from a nonprofit, and in spite of the climate now, they are going to have an equity core of people to come together in spite of all the things we're not supposed to be doing in 2026. And that gives me hope.
Hope, it's a beautiful, beautiful thing. And honestly, having different organizations just continue to prioritize equity and inclusion, diversity, it is just paramount. I think when people make the argument that it should be, I guess the right word would be, they want to focus on performance-based competition rather than, or something similar to that, as opposed to equity and, affirmative kind of things. It's sad, because the truth is that not everyone lives by the same set of circumstances. And it doesn't, in 2026, in my humble opinion, yes, there's disadvantages to being a person of color and certain setbacks, but what I'm referencing is even financial, disabilities and inequity in that way. So, people don't understand that there really is a gap, and that allows certain people to have access to things that other families have had access to for generations. But yes, so this has been an amazing conversation. I just want to wrap up with you just what is your message to the people that are watching this? Today we have entrepreneurs, we have people that are looking to start their business, we have people that have already been in business, and everywhere in between. And also just community members and even your audience. What do you have to say as your message here to close this episode?
So, are you teachable? Are you able to actually confront what you're doing critically, with a critical eye? I believe that all work is inside out. You can't do anything for anybody else if you're not doing for yourself. And it has to be simultaneous. You can't wait till you get all your stuff together before you work with other people. But concomitant with your work, with your business, you should be saying, why should I exist? We used to go and ask schools, why should you exist? What are you doing that's really changing the lives of other human beings in meaningful ways? And if you can constantly be under that microscope for yourself and catch yourself before you fall. People are so afraid to say, I don't know how to do that. I don't know how to read a finance report, but I know I can have my friend who is in finance help me with that. So what are your limitations? What are your strengths? And can you grow too fast? I don't know. That's a question you will have to. Something in advertising that always bothered me is that you sell the sizzle and not the steak. And as I get older, I become very much aware of all the people that are selling the sizzle and not the steak. And unfortunately, it's far too many people. Yeah.
Wow. Powerful words. Thank you so much for being a part of this episode. And so this has been the Entrepreneurs Club podcast. I'm Carter McKinney. This is Miss Camilla Greene, and it has been an absolute pleasure. So tune in to the next episode, guys, and stay tuned. All right. Have a good one. Bye-bye.